So this video is the first part of the concepts about the cash and cash equivalents. First up, let us define what is cash. So in layman's term, cash means money. Pag sinabi nating money, ito yung mga currencies, bills, and coins na alam natin. Pero in accounting, hindi lang money ang pasok sa definition ng cash. Also, legal tenders such as checks, bank drafts, and money order. So there are some characteristics na dapat ma-meet in order to classify as cash. First is, cash must be unrestricted. When we say unrestricted, ibig sabihin, it must be available for current use. So for example, if may cash ka dyan on hand, and that cash is wala kang paglalaanan or walang certain or specific use, and it is available anytime, so that is unrestricted. For example, cash that is available for payment of current use or current expenses such as payment of utilities, salaries, and other expenses in the business. So another characteristic to be form part of cash is that it must be readily acceptable by the bank for immediate credit and deposit. So for example is yung hawak nating legal tenders such as cheque. If pirinesent natin sila sa bank, it is readily acceptable for immediate credit and deposit. So why immediate credit? So sa part natin as a depositor, meron tayong asset. Pero sa bank, sa part nila, they recognize a liability, kaya i-record nila yung deposit natin as credit. And on the other hand, if babawasan nila yung account natin, it must be debited. So in the part of the bank, any cash receipts is recorded as a credit and any cash disbursement or payment is debited. So what are the characteristics for a check to be readily acceptable by the bank? So first is that the check must be in good form. Ibig sabihin, walang butas, walang lukot, or walang dumi yung cheque. If merong defects yun, or may dumi or lukot or sira, ibig sabihin is, if galing yun sa customer, it equates to na collection. Kasi nga, the check is not accepted by the bank. So, pwede mo siyang ibalik kung saan mo siya nakuha. So, dapat first requirement for a check to be readily acceptable by the bank is that it is in good form. Second is that the check must be dated. So for example, that check represents a collection from customer and the date today is December 31. Pero yung check is dated next year, January pa, 2021. So ibig sabihin, post-dated pa yung check. So pwedeng wala pang pondo yung account nung nagbigay sa'yo ng cheque, kaya may certain date pa kung kailan magkakaroon. So that check that is not dated is not readily acceptable by the bank and pwede mo yung ibalik sa pinangkuhanan mo ng cheque or sino man yung nagbigay sa'yo ng check. So there are three types that form part of cash, and first na pag-uusapan natin is cash on hand. So pag sinabi natin cash on hand, these are coins, currencies, or bills or simply money na in custody of company. Ibig sabihin hawak mismo ng company. Next is cash in bank. So from the term itself, ito yung mga pera ng business na nakabangko. So there are various types of bank accounts. So first is the savings account. Dito, withdrawal is made through ATM or over the counter. Yung pupunta ka mismo sa bangko para makakuha ng pera. So we are very familiar sa saving accounts na it is interest bearing. Pero sa mga bangko, sobrang maliit lang yung interest dito. And also, interest income earned sa savings account is subject pa sa final tax. So, ibig sabihin yung interest na makikredit sa bank account is net of the tax pa. So, mababa na nga yung interest, mas bababa pa dahil sa tax. So, another one is checkings account. So, from the term itself, withdrawal is made or covered by checks or cheque. Next one is demand. So from the term itself, demand, so may specific time as to withdrawal. So itong demand na to is at the demand ni depositor. So for example is time deposit. So yun nga, sa time deposit, may specific time na kailangan tapusin bago ma-withdraw yung pera. And last is current account. So from the term itself, these are cash in bank that are available for current use. So yung demand and check accounts, normally they are not interest bearing, pero it varies depende if magpo-provide ng bank ng interest. So dito papapasok yung impress system. So pag sinabing impress system, for example, any collections from customers diretso sa bangko. And on the other hand, any payments or disbursement made by the business is covered by checks. So since kailangan ng check, a checkings account is needed. So bakit ginagawa to sa Impress system? In order to monitor yung flow of money sa business para alam kung ano yung papasok na pera and magkano yung lalabas na pera. So last type under the cash is the cash funds. So from the term itself, these are cash that are available for current use. So bakit meron pa tayong cash funds? So since nga sa cash in bank is fina-follow natin yung Impress system na kung saan any cash payments or disbursement is covered by check, so itong cash fund na to is established for practicality. Kasi nga, hindi naman always kailangan ng cheque. So example ng cash funds are the following. So first is the payroll fund. So payroll fund is funds intended for payment of salaries ng mga employees. Next is change fund. So itong change mo na to, for example sa groceries and fast food, yung mga panukle sa customers, ito yun. So next is tax fund. So we are aware na businesses pay taxes. So para hindi mabigla yung business, some of them is naglalaan ng fund for the payment of taxes para hindi biglaan yung pagbabayad, and also hindi nila makaligtaan magbayad ng payments kasi failure to payment of taxes is may charges or penalties. So last is the petty cash fund. So from the term itself, petty, which means small, this petty cash fund is intended for payment ng mga small expenses ng business. So we're done with the cash. Next would be the cash equivalents. So cash equivalents is defined as short-term, highly liquid investment. So short-term meaning maikli lang yung maturity. And since short-term lang, it is highly liquid, meaning it is near to becoming cash. So liquidity yung tawag if an asset is near to becoming cash. So when we talk of investment, we have a purpose na kumita dito. So return on investment yung tawag dun sa kita na nakukuha natin from our investment. What are the two type of investment? The equity and debt investment. So first is pag-usapan natin yung equity investment. So equity investments are represented by shares. So these shares represent ownership sa isang company. So there are two types, which is the ordinary and preference shares. So the difference between the two, kapag ordinary shares, they have voting rights. However, kapag preference, wala silang voting rights. Pero they are priority over sa ordinary shares in terms sa dividends. So generally, since equity investment represent ownership, it has no maturity. And since no maturity, it is not a cash equivalent. Kasi hindi natin masusukat if short-term ba siya. However, may exception sa rule. Exception is that preference shares with mandatory redemption date, and yung redemption date niya must be 3 months or less. So kapag 3 months or less, pasok siya sa cash equivalents. So ano ba tong preference shares with mandatory redemption date? It is the time wherein yung corporation is ibabuyback niya yung shares at predetermined price according sa agreement. So dapat itong buyback ng shares by the corporation must be mandatory. So in short, parang meron na siyang maturity date. So next type is the debt investment. So in here, debt investment represent a creditor-debtor relationship. So, paano ba nagkakaroon ng debt investment? So, for example, yung company is need niya ng money pero not in terms of issuance ng share. So, pwede siyang mag-issue ng bonds. So, itong bonds na to represents debt. So, creditor, ito yung mga nagpo-provide ng money. So, in this case, in the bonds, kung sino yung mga investors, sila yung creditor. Sino yung mga nagpautang. So, the creditors have investment in bonds. On the other hand, yung debtor naman, which is yung company na nag-issue ng bonds, siya yung umutang and meron siyang liability. So, meron siyang bonds payable. So, since it is a liability, it has a maturity date. In order to be classified as cash equivalents, that investment must be currently traded and termed 3 month or less. So, itong 3 month or less na to is from the date of purchase or acquisition. Kung kailan ka nag-acquire ng debt investment. So, for example, December 31, 2020 ka nag-acquire ng bond investment. And ang maturity date ay February 2021. So, pasok siya sa 3 months or less, kaya cash equivalent siya. So what if December 31, 2020 ka nag-acquire and ang maturity date niya is December 31, 2021. So 1 year ang maturity date. So by that, hindi na siya cash equivalents kasi hindi siya pasok sa 3 months or less. 'Di ba nga, cash equivalents is defined as short-term and highly liquid investment. So for a debt investment to be considered as a cash equivalent, it must be termed 3 months or less from the date of purchase or acquisition of the investment. So we now go to the measurement of the cash and cash equivalents. The measurement is about the assigning of the peso amount sa ating mga transactions. So first is the cash. Cash is measured at face value. The face value is kung ano yung stated amount sa bill as it is na. So, bakit ganito? Since may peso stability assumption in accounting na kung saan amount of cash or peso is stable, so ibig sabihin hindi siya nag-iiba, kaya cash is measured at face value lang. So, cash equivalents naman is measured at face value. So, ano yung face value ng cash equivalents? It is the principal. So, principal, hindi maturity value. Next is cash in foreign currencies. So, cash in foreign currencies must be measured at the current exchange rate. So, if in dollars, kailangan natin i-convert into peso kasi nga mayroong figures din na dapat common currency yung gamitin sa pag-present sa financial statements. So, for example is, yung company uses the calendar year and the calendar year ends at December 31. So, bali ang gagamitin nating exchange rate would be the closing rate at the end of that accounting period, which is December 31. So, always closing rate. Next is the cash in bank in brink of bankruptcy. So, paano if yung company is meron siyang deposited cash in the bank na palugi na or pasara? So, it is measured at the estimated realizable value. So, for example, 1 million yung total na cash mo dun sa banko na yon. So, sa Philippines, meron tayong PDIC or the Philippine Deposit Insurance Company na kung saan may 500,000 na maximum na pwedeng ma-recover sa mga deposits natin sa mga banko na na-bankrupt. So, between the 1 million and 500,000, of course, we choose the 500,000 kasi nga, we have the principle of conservatism. We choose the lower amount that has a lesser effect on the equity. So, how do cash and cash equivalents be presented in the financial statements? So, dito, cash and cash equivalents line item is presented as the first item among the current assets. So, accounts in the balance sheet are arranged according to their liquidity. So, since cash and cash equivalents ang una, sila yung pinaka-most liquid. So, near to becoming cash. Kasi yung cash, as it is cash na, and yung cash equivalents naman are short-term and highly liquid investments. And they are presented as single line item kasi they are aggregated. So, deposits in foreign countries that are not subject to foreign exchange restrictions are included as part of cash. So, di ba one definition of cash natin is that it must be unrestricted, kaya pasok ito. While deposits in foreign countries that are subject to foreign exchange restrictions, if material yung amount, they are classified separately as non-current assets. So, we now go to the classifications of the time deposits, treasury bills, and money market placements. They are part of the cash and cash equivalents if termed 3 months or less. So, na-discuss na yan kanina. And also, current investments or part of the short-term assets if the term is 3 months rather, but not over 1 year. And last would be they are non-current investments or long-term assets if the term is beyond or more than 1 year. So next would be the classification as to purpose. So they are part of the cash and cash equivalents if they are held for current operations for the payment of a current obligation. So discuss a while ago na dapat for current use sila such as payment ng salaries, utilities, taxes, and other current expenses ng business. On the other hand, they are part of the non-current or long-term assets if they are held for non-current purpose or for payment of a non-current obligation. So, lahat ng to is pasok sa discussion kanina. In addition to that, cash held for payment of liability should parallel the classification of the liability. And sabihin natin na yung liability niya before is non-current. Pero by this year, current na siya kasi nga less than 1 year na yung liability. So by that, yung fund set aside for payment of that liability, since naging current liability na siya, the fund will be held as current asset. And therefore, the fund becomes part of cash. So this is just the part 1 of the concepts about the cash and cash equivalents. The part 2 will be soon available in the channel. Thank you and God bless.